This morning's scripture comes from the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, verses 1 through 14. The hand of the one who is was upon me, and it carried me away by the Spirit of God and set me down in a valley full of bones. God made me walk up and down among them, and I saw that there was a vast number of bones lying there in the valley, and they were very dry. God asked me, "Mere mortal, can these bones live?" And I answered, "Only you know that, Sovereign Holy One." And God said, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Holy One. Sovereign God says to these bones, I'm going to breathe life into you. I will fasten sinews on you, clothe you with flesh, cover you with skin, and give you breath. And you will live, and you will know that I am Sovereign God." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, suddenly there was a noise, a rattling, and all the bones came together, bone to matching bone. As I watched, sinews appeared on them, and flesh clothed them, and skin covered them. But there was no breath in them. Then God said to me, "Prophesy to the wind. Prophesy, mere mortal, say to it, thus says Sovereign God, approach from the four winds, breath, and breathe on these slain that they may live." I prophesied as I was commanded, and breath came into them, and they came alive and stood up on their feet, a vast multitude. Then God said to me, "Mere mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel." The people keep saying, "Our bones are dry, our hope is gone, and we are doomed." Prophesy therefore and say to them, thus says Sovereign God, I'm going to open your graves and raise you up from the dead, my people. I will return you to the land of Israel. When I open your graves and raise you up, you, my people, will know that I am the Holy One. Then I will put my Spirit into you, and you will return to life, and I will settle you back on your own land. Then you will know that I, the Holy One, have spoken and made all this happen, says Sovereign God. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding.
Excuse me. Do you ever get to church and you look down at the scripture and you think, why did I get dressed today? I could be home. Instead, I'm going to listen to something about the Valley of the Dry Bones, and no good can possibly come from that. I understand how that would be a rational understanding of what this next few moments are going to be. I'd ask you to give me a chance, because it's a very challenging text. I get that, I understand that. Lots of things to turn us off as we look at that. You didn't probably come to church wanting to hear, we're hopeless, we're dried bones, we're doomed, we have no chance. Because right now, politics kind of looks like that, right? And so to have this kind of almost escapist verse about prophesy to the bones, right? That's very weird. Prophesy to the wind, I'll open up your graves. When I was in seminary, we studied a lot of the early theologians, and there was one that I thought said possibly the dumbest thing of all time. It's a contest, but the ancient leader Tertullian famously said, I believe because it is absurd. Which would be my candidate for the dumbest comment of all time. I believe because it is absurd. What we have to do when we look at a verse like this is to realize this is coming from the Jewish text. This is not a Christian text. In classical Judaism, many, if not most, did not believe in the afterlife. So in this text about bodies coming together, bones coming together, sinews coming together, it's clearly a symbol of something that's going to happen to the people collectively together. I don't mean to be a bummer at Easter, but I really don't think the Jewish tradition or the early church believed that bodies just got up. That's a poetic way of expressing the life that goes on. But as I sometimes say to my sadness afterwards on Easter, if the story is true that all these saints rose from the dead when Jesus was resurrected, would anybody not convert? I mean, if Reverend Moon could raise people from the dead, wouldn't that kind of do it for you? I mean, that would be kind of hard to argue with that. So the fact that people didn't convert says that this is a poem. It's not something that physically happened. I believe the prophets were not fortune tellers. They were very sensitive people who listened to their times to see what people could expect coming down the road. In the early prophets, it's saying to the people, change course, repent, or this is going to happen to you. But by the time of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's a very strange person, very, very strange. But he's in agony because he can see what's happening to his country. He can see that they've already sold out at such a profound level that they really may not recover in their current form. And what he wants to do is give people hope through the catastrophes to come. Because if you sugarcoat it and you say everything's going to be okay, the president tells so many lies every day. He bullies everybody around. And there are people, Christian people, who follow him so religiously that there's nothing he could do that would disqualify their support. This is a very bad sign for a republic. This is like last days of Rome kind of stuff. And I think what Ezekiel would say to us, because let's face it, we're standing in the very footprints of Ezekiel today. We are looking at how countries sink or swim. You return to your core principles or you're torn apart. And those are kind of the choices. You have a much better chance of surviving if you face that. If you will look at the dry bones and say, this is my situation. I may not like it, but this is the terrain I need to navigate through. If I'm going to have hope, it has to be hope about reality. What a prophet is doing is saying, some of this is going to survive, some of it's already dead. You identify with many things that are dead. If you identify with the propaganda of our nation, the story that Europeans came and discovered this continent full of people of color, if you've internalized that story, it puts you at odds with most of humankind. It doesn't mean you're bad. You were born into that story. And what Ezekiel would say to us is you have to let go of that. You have to let go of the capitalist teaching that property is more important than nature. You have to. It's insane. It's suicidal to detach from nature so you can make more money. I've said before, when all is said and done, the money that was in the safe of the Titanic probably doesn't matter that much. Who was winning at the blackjack table? It doesn't matter. So what the prophet is doing is helping us come to reality and detach from the dreams that cannot live and choose the ones that cannot die. I was thinking this week, there's an Italian, there's a Texan Italian, which I'm preparing you for me to mispronounce his name. It's something like Gramsci, brilliant political philosopher. And he said, when one age is dying and another age cannot yet be born, it is a time of monsters. It's a time of pathologies, is another translation of it. That it's times like this when fundamentalism rises. White supremacy, patriarchy. Because people are trying to get back to what they were told were their hopes. They were always false hopes. They were always lies. But it's understandable as human beings, we try to get back to who we thought we were. As I say, I think the way I look at it, we're standing in Ezekiel's footprints today. That valley of dry bones, as unpleasant as the image is what you're going to see on Fox News every night. Fundamentalism is the skeleton of a living faith. It's the dry bones. It's the death throes. What's happening in Washington right now, nationalism, is the death throes. It's the skeleton of civic duty. It doesn't have the principles by which a nation can survive. But Ezekiel is saying this to us because there is hope if we'll let go of who we were told we were. Christianity was a radical transformation. And it was as political as it is spiritual, because if we're mistreating each other, then we can't talk about love. So we need a spirituality and an activism that blend together in a balance, it seems to me. We have to realize that the disease we see in the White House, in many ways, was born out of the church. Now, I'm not saying that the president is doing what he's doing because of Jesus, something Jesus said. That's clearly not true. Anybody that quotes what's 2 Corinthians, was that I love the Bible. I brought the Bible with me. Which part of the Bible do you like? It's too personal. I'll wave this in your face, but it's too personal for me to talk about what's in it. I believe that, don't you? That's very, very credible. But when you came to church as a child and they told you to affirm as creeds things that you knew were not true, or at least you didn't know that they were true. When as a child they asked you to affirm that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, you didn't know that. And they didn't care. All they wanted you to do is say yes. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But is that the foundation Jesus was laying? I don't think so. I think that's something somebody does after that. An editor does that afterwards because they don't want you living the Sermon on the Mount. Right? Christians could serve the empire once Christianity was reduced to creeds. But you never hear much fundamentalism preaching about the Sermon on the Mount because it's antithetical. It's turning the other cheek, don't judge. You're kind of running out of things that fundamentalism stands on. But I don't believe that religion is the motive for this kind of sickness. I think people use religion for their own purposes. I wish we would stop calling it the Bible Belt, because what we're talking about are the Confederate States of America. Using the Bible for domination. Again, if you were taught that as a child, it doesn't mean it's your fault or you're a bad person. But we got to let go of that stuff if we want hope for the future. I was one time listening to an interview down in San Antonio, and there was a liberal, well-to-do woman, privileged woman, interviewing somebody from the third world, what we call the third world. Those are really the colonized countries of Europe and the United States. They were doing just fine before we got there to help them. And this person of privilege says to this woman from the third world, she says, sometimes I look at the news and I sink in despair. I sink in despair. It's overwhelming. I just pull back. How do you keep going? And you know what the woman from the third world supposedly said? If you're the target, you don't have the luxury of despair. Now, does that get through our defenses? We've been propagandized to be passive about our human family, about our planet, and to recite words like a parrot. Ezekiel is saying, we have to strip all of that away. It's very painful, and we have to grieve our way out of the lies that we were taught as children. When somebody talks about what the realities of the world, it looks like a valley of dry bones, and we don't want to hear it. And that's very normal and not unhealthy to have to pull back sometimes because it's overwhelming. But if you don't want to live in despair, you have to keep at least your little toe touching it when you have the energy, when you have the bandwidth. If you're sick, if you're exhausted, if you are in grief, you get a pass. Right? You rest, you heal. But you also know that your hope lies in being connected to each other. Because when somebody says, what is my purpose? I asked that question for decades and decades. As a teenager. I wasn't a teenager for decades, but I started as a teen. Preachers don't tell the truth. You see through it. But I finally realized that's like asking, what is the meaning of a Lego? What is the meaning of a letter in the alphabet? By itself, nothing. We are social mammals. Our emotions tie us to each other. And so Ezekiel is talking about the intuitive understanding of reconnecting to life. He doesn't believe in the afterlife, most likely. By spirit, he doesn't mean what the Greeks meant by it. He talks about breath. He talks about the wind. He's talking about what ties us to nature and to life. That's what had been lost. And that's where our hope lies. It reconnects us with everything. But we have to realize that that's probably only going to come through trauma now. Trauma unleashes something within human beings that we can't get at any other way. I'm not saying we should seek out trauma. If we could avoid it, we would. But the problems of this nation did not start with Donald Trump. And they don't end with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the face of the underbelly of this nation and this version of Christianity that has been here from when the Pilgrims landed. And it was already there in Europe. There are pine cones, I've heard, that can only give life if they've been in a fire. There are things that can only happen through discomfort and pain. Again, nobody seeks that out, but if you're in that pain, if you're in that trauma, then you know something also can be born from it. It didn't happen so that something would be born from it. But the greatest prophets, I'm talking about artists, I'm talking about scientists, I'm talking about friends of humankind, their greatness was born out of trauma and shock. The difference between carbon and a diamond is what? Heat and pressure. And a more mundane image I've always liked is you don't know what's in a tea bag until you put it in boiling water. I challenge you this week to think of your life heroes and to go back and see how they got there. They came through times like this. And what Ezekiel is saying is when we stop identifying with the trappings, what we discover is we are expressions of the cosmic process. We are expressions of the energy of life itself. And while we come and go, we die, the life within us does not. It comes through us, it's expressed through it, but it connects to everything else. That energy of life is what he's talking about by his version of the resurrection. It's in you even if you can't feel it. Have you ever been at a funeral, let's say a grandmom, and she's lost her life partner? And the preacher doesn't console her, obviously. The music doesn't do anything. And then somebody puts the grandbaby on her lap. Now she's feeling the same grief, but everything is translated. Because at some level in her bones, she knows that life goes on. Somewhere in her bones, she realizes it's not just about this brief moment. Something is expressed through our greatness, through our compassion, through our caring. That's there even if we fail, even if we chicken out from time to time, it's still there waiting for us in our bones. Your body knows things your mind hasn't discovered. Your body has a memory that goes back millions of years. So I believe Ezekiel is calling us to that wisdom, to that life. When we turn God into an idea, we can lose contact with that energy for which the symbol really refers, it really stands. It's talking about that mysterious something out of which we emerge, that mysterious something that ties us together with other beings, that mysterious something that confronts us in other beings and informs us. Einstein once said that you can't find an answer at the same level as the problem. And he said something very strange. He said, if an answer isn't absurd, it's probably not going to get you out of that dilemma. And I think I may have jumped the gun on Tertullian. Because what's been starched out of Christianity is the politics. They're not choosing poverty and pulling back for their own sake. They're doing it so they can check out of the system of violence, of domination. And sometimes to be a human being within the machine sounds absurd. Sounds like you're going to be the loser. And what Ezekiel wants to know is, no, that's not what's going to happen. Life will be born through you. Hope will be born through you. But it has to start at the lowest point. Because that's the foundation of your life. If you can find peace of mind there, everything else will be easy. It's in the valley of bones that our trauma begins to transform. And we check out of the mental, superficial idea level of spirituality and feel our interconnectedness. Zen has a great way of teaching this with the riddles. Jesus spoke in riddles too, but because people take it literally, I don't know how you take a parable literally, but we do. The riddles of Buddhism help us get a better understanding of what Jesus is trying to do in us. There was a story where there was a student who kept intellectualizing everything, turning everything into ideas and theories and beliefs. So the master would ask questions and then always say no to whatever the answer was. One day, the young student got so frustrated, they took a toad and threw it at the teacher. And the teacher, without blinking or looking up, said, "Still too intellectual." When we live in our ideas, in the myth that we're a separate being, we become reactive, and we think that's what reality is. That cruelty is more powerful than kindness. It's not. That lies are more powerful than truth. It's not. We stand in the very footprints of Ezekiel this day. And we can choose despair, and sometimes it's just going to happen. But what he's reminding us is that we have some other options too. We can let go of the world that is dying and say yes to the world that's being born. But to do that, we have to make our peace with the bones. We have to get down to that level of gritty reality where we're not imagining anything about nature. And all of a sudden we feel that energy of life coming through us in the strangest ways and places. What Ezekiel is saying is start while it still looks hopeless to you. Because the life you express will change the dynamics. They will change the equation. The same way a baby at a funeral doesn't change anything objectively, but changes everything subjectively. He's saying, let go of the world you know is dying and say yes to the world that is being born. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.